Blessings, everyone. Thank you for joining me. And I'm blessed today to have as my guest Kenneth Crush. And he's the author of this really good book that blessedly he sent me. We actually exchanged books. So I think I get the better part of the deal. It's My Rosary Companion, Praying the Rosary with the Christian East. This book was kind of a godsend to me because right now I'm I don't know how to put it, transferring, or I'm going over to Orthodoxy from Roman Catholicism. And there's definitely some Catholic traditions that I would like to take with me, and the Rosary is definitely one. Another one is a devotion to Saint Joseph. I mean, they have that in the East, but it's different than what we have in Roman Catholicism. So when Ken sent me this book, I was like, wow, this is really an answer to a prayer. So thank you, Ken, for writing it.
You're welcome. It's been fun.
Thank you. Let me give everybody a little bio of Kenneth, just so they know. So Kenneth Crush is from Pennsylvania. Hey, I have a connection to Pennsylvania. Is a graduate of St. Pius X High School. That's where your love of theology began. Upon graduating from high school, Mr. Crush entered the United States Marine Corps. Wow, where he served on active duty for 4 years. Thank you. After military service, Mr. Crush received a BA in theology from Immaculata University and an MA in theology from Holy Apostles College and Seminary in Cromwell, Connecticut. And you've also been active in your parish, and thank you for your service too, Ken. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
God bless you. So are you a lifelong Roman Catholic, born and raised?
No, not really. I was baptized Roman Catholic.
Okay.
On my dad's side is like pretty much 100% Ukrainian. So my grandfather somehow ended up, he was Catholic, but he ended up being raised for many years of his life as Russian Orthodox, but he was Ukrainian. And my grandmother on my dad's side was raised Ukrainian Catholic. And my mom's side was pretty much German Lutheran. So my mom converted when she married my dad. So it's a long story how my grandparents ended up, they were married in the Eastern Church. They had their first son baptized in the Orthodox Church. And then by the time, 6 years later, when my dad was born, they had him baptized in a Roman Catholic church. So how they ended up in a Roman Catholic church is a whole other story. I think it was, from what I had heard from them, they didn't want to side with either his mom or her mom. So they chose a neutral, because I don't know if there was any friction there or what, but it was kind of, I think, their way of going off on their own, and doing their own, thing. So, and my grandfather, who was Orthodox, was apparently baptized Latin Rite. Where they lived in Jersey, there was no Eastern Church, so they were baptized as Latin Rite. But then when they moved to Pottstown, they jumped in with a crowd that was actually starting an Orthodox church in Pottstown in I guess they started the plans in like 1926, and they raised money and had a church built by 1928. Oh. So his mom and dad were active in that church. They helped lay brick, and he was married in that church, and my grandmother were married in that church. And there again, my uncle was baptized there. And then about 6 years later, they ended up at Latin Rite. And they actually, kind of ironic, they ended up going to a Polish, like a Polish Roman Catholic church. My grandfather always said that his dad always reminded him, and he used to say it in Ukrainian, never forget you are Ukrainian. And my grandmother was definitely Ukrainian, and they ended up in a Polish church, which is, kind of defies it. It's an interesting choice. I think a lot of their friends were at that church as well.
Yeah.
It fit.
Yeah, the Philly area has a lot of Eastern Europeans. There's a big Polish
Yep.
community there,
Yeah.
and Russians, and yeah, I guess Ukrainians. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So I was baptized Latin Rite. Although apparently, like, I don't have to change rites because
right.
my great grandfather was Eastern. My grandfather never changed rites. Even when he became Roman Catholic, the priest wanted to like remarry him or something at that time. This was like back in the 50s. And he's like, no, no.
Yeah.
Like like there's no record of him becoming Latin Rite. He just kind of joined that church. And I mean, he loved the Orthodox Church his whole life. You know, and all the stories that I heard growing up were about the Eastern Church.
Yeah.
And, you know, I was baptized Latin Rite, and we weren't really like, we didn't go to church every weekend. And not until I was in 7th grade. So prior to that, you know, my exposure to church was maybe Christmas and Easter. And when I spent the night at my grandmom and grandpa's house, they always went to church. So in fact, they used to watch church on TV before they actually went to church. So that was my exposure to the church then. But there again, all the stories I heard growing up were about the Eastern Church.
Right.
So when I was in high school, probably as soon as I could drive, I ended up going to both the Orthodox church in the area that they actually went to when they were younger, and there was a Byzantine Catholic church there that I was active in.
Okay.
And then there was a Ukrainian Catholic church in the area as well. So I kind of, in high school, I started kind of really diving into the Eastern Church in high school.
Okay. I want to talk to you a little bit and have you explain to people different rites, because I think a lot of Catholics, I mean, I've been, you know, an active Catholic for 20 years, and I didn't understand this. So I was hoping you could explain it to me. Now, there's the Latin Rite, which I guess most people would understand as either the Novus Ordo or the traditional Latin Mass, right? That's all part of the Latin Rite? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And
there's
then,
also the Ambrosian, right?
Okay, I don't know.
Yeah. Right, yeah.
So when we mean rite, we're saying R-I-T-E, right? So that's not R-I-G-E. Okay.
Yep.
Right. So, and then there's, I hope this isn't a pejorative, but they use it in Orthodoxy, where the space that I'm in right now is there's the Uniate churches, which is, would that be considered like Ukrainian Rite?
That would be, yeah, it's usually related to Byzantine, the Byzantine Christians of the Byzantine Rite in union with Rome.
Okay.
So like Ukrainians, you know.
Okay.
Yeah. Ukrainians, Ruthenians, those from maybe like Slovakia, Czechoslovakia area, Hungary.
Okay.
We get sometimes called uniates. I think it just has to do with being in union.
Okay.
I don't.
Okay. So those particular, I don't know what you say, churches or rites have a different rite from the Latin Rite, but they're in union with Rome.
Yeah, there's multiple diagrams that I've looked at online. One I like the best has Jerusalem at the top.
Okay.
You know, it's an obvious one there. You know, Christianity spread from Jerusalem. And then it has Antioch, Rome, and Alexandria. Okay. And under Rome, you could put the Ambrosian Rite, the Masoretic Rite. I hope I don't mispronounce these. The Masoretic Rite and the Latin Rite. Okay. Under Antioch, you would have the Byzantine Rite, the Armenian, the Maronite, the Malabar, the Chaldean, and the Malankar. So that would kind of maybe fall on, and I think there's also some kind of Syrian Rite that would kind of be classified under the Antioch part. And then Alexandria would be Coptic Christians and Ethiopians. So, and then under Byzantine, there's a lot of subcategories like Russian, Ukrainian, Bulgarian, Serbian, Romanian, Slovakian, Hungarian. So sometimes people say there's 26 rites. That's there's not, I mean, it depends how you label them, I guess you could say.
And some of those rites are in union with Rome and some are not.
Mhm. All the ones that I mentioned have yeah, they have I don't want to call it branches, but they have churches in union with Rome. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
and to my knowledge, the only one that was never not in union with Rome is the Maronites.
Okay. Yeah, my father, interesting enough, was born and raised in Sicily, and he was born and raised in the Byzantine Rite.
What?
Yes.
Wow.
Isn't that interesting?
Interesting.
Yeah, Sicily is kind of a weird place because, I mean, of course, it was a seafaring, nation, and you had all different kinds of people there. The Byzantine Empire was there, the Italians were there, everybody was, the Moors were there, everybody. And so there's these churches in Sicily that are, I mean, you walk into it and it is an Orthodox church. And that's the way my dad was raised. And he had relatives that were Byzantine Rite priests, and they were married, even though they were Catholic. I know, so it's so confusing. Catholic, maybe it's just confusing for me. But they were Catholic, but
yeah. I'm actually in the Ukrainian Catholic Church, and a lot of our priests are married.
It's cool.
I would say most of our priests are married.
So part of the Eastern Rite, I mean, many of the Eastern Rite churches, let's just say this is the one that I'm going towards, is Russian Orthodox, and they are not in union with Rome. Russian.
Russian Orthodox would not be. There are Russian Catholics. They're like very, very small. I think there's one actually out in San Francisco, isn't there?
I mean, we have the big cathedral here, which is Joy of All Who Sorrow.
Yeah.
On Geary Street, and that's where St. John Maximovich. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And Father Seraphim Rose was there, and that's the big parish. So, and
I got really interested in him when I was in the Marine Corps.
Who?
Seraphim Rose.
I love him. I think
I read the book about him that was like this thick back in the day, Not of This World or something like that.
Yes, that's it.
Just very interesting life, very interesting story.
Yeah, Haramuk Damachin wrote that, and interesting enough, if you want to see it, I interviewed his niece, and
I heard it.
Oh, good. Yeah, and she wrote a book about him, and she's had interesting things to say. And yeah, Father Seraphim Rose is a man of our times who is timeless. So
yeah, and the fact that he entered the Eastern Church at that time when there was so much craziness going on in the world,
60s.
He entered into this ancient Christianity at a time when it seemed like in the Catholic Church, at least of the Latin Rite, they were kind of throwing away things.
Sure.
Here he ends up joining a church that had really preserved a lot of that. Preserved a lot of tradition and stuff. So I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, and it's all here in California and San Francisco, and he was the native-born guy. So much of his life really mirrored what was going on here in California in the 60s, but then what would go on in the 60s with all the exploration of Eastern, and what I mean here is I don't mean Eastern Christian, but Eastern Oriental religions, and a real falling away. And he got into that too, falling away from the Christian tradition, and so yeah, I love him. So God rest his soul. Now, could you tell people a little bit about how the Latin Rite liturgy differs from? I mean, I know how the Latin Rite liturgy differs from the Eastern Rite, just in terms of like the vernacular, but just in terms of everything, the prayers. Could you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, just like a rite, the rite is like a kind of an easy way of understanding is like it's a unique theological, liturgical, spiritual heritage of a group of people that developed according to like a historical and cultural, according to certain cultural and historical circumstances. So I think just kind of like getting that definition out, I think, is a good way to start. And I kind of like a short, easy way of understanding a rite would be, there's different ways of expressing the one Catholic, faith. So the teachings in the Catholic Church would be the same, but expressed in very different ways. And one of the most obvious ways would be liturgy.
Yep.
If you see, now it's confusing because you've got the traditional Latin Mass, and then you have the Novus Ordo.
Right.
And in structure, I think in basic structure, the traditional Latin Mass has more, I think, I mean, they both have a lot in common, I think, but the basic structure, I think, the old Latin Mass, I think, maybe has a little more in common with the Eastern Church, but then I think the way it's celebrated in the Novus Ordo might be more inspired by the Eastern Church, where you have more dialogue between the priest and the congregation, which you have definitely in the Eastern Church. You don't have this idea of like a low mass where you're just kind of there, reading in a book. There's a constant dialogue in the Eastern Church, and I would say that also is evident in the new rite. The Byzantine liturgy is obviously much longer. It starts off in a totally different way. It starts off, totally different. There's even parts that happen before we even get there with the priest, preparing things. And we have a litany right in the beginning. It begins, "Blessed is the kingdom of the Father and the Son of the Holy Spirit, now and forever and ever, amen." And everybody sings amen. And then there's all these litanies with "Lord have mercies," and it goes right into a psalm, psalms, and then the hymn to the Incarnation, and some more psalms and more litanies, and then eventually you have like what would be the equivalent of like a responsorial psalm, which we call the Prokeimenon, and you've got your readings, you got your epistle, the gospel, and then we also have entrances where there's like processions in and out of the sanctuary. So the priest kind of processes around the altar, goes out into the nave, and then back in to the sanctuary. Obviously, we have what's called an iconostas, or icon screen.
Right.
So it's kind of like a wall. It's not a wall. It's kind of, I call it like a meeting place between heaven and earth. And there's all these, there's a door in the middle, called the royal doors. You have these two doors on the side that are deacon's doors. And so there's a lot of activity, a lot of movement, but it's not like pointless. It's all very,
Exactly.
And I mean, there again, basic structure is the same, but I would say we have a lot more symbolism, I guess you could say.
Ken, actually 20 odd years ago, when I was I had left the faith for a long time. And actually there was sort of a period there where I was fluctuating between Orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism, the Latin rite. And because I had been raised in the liturgy of the 1970s and the 80s in San Francisco, which was very folksy. And I was raised in the guitar mass. So when I came back to the faith, I knew nothing, but I remembered, for at least when I was a kid, that I did not like that sort of 1960s, folk mass. So when I was came back to the faith in 99, that was still, hanging on, God forbid. So I did go to, I can't remember, since it's been 20 years ago. I think it was just a Byzantine Catholic parish, and I knew nothing. And then, they did have the iconostasis, and there were pews, like in a regular Catholic church with kneelers, but of course, like in most Eastern rites, you stand most of the time.
Mhm.
And then, the priest was behind the iconostasis. And the other thing that struck me very different from the Novus Ordo is you didn't have like a plethora of like lay people, around the altar or doing anything. The priest, and I guess it was the deacons, pretty much did everything. And then I did receive communion. I guess it was okay for me to receive communion. And they do it under both species. So it's the leavened bread in the chalice with the wine, and then I guess it's an tincture, and they put it in your mouth with a spoon. Yeah.
Yes.
Which was very foreign to me. So it's not a host.
For most people, yeah. And you don't say amen. You tilt your head back and open your mouth, and the priest prays a short prayer, and yeah, it's different. In the Latin Rite, in the traditional Latin Rite, you would receive on your knees,
right,
at the communion rail, and receive the host on your tongue. In the Eastern Church, I think the idea is more you stand in the presence of a king. So I think it worked well in the Latin Rite to kneel. I think that was a beautiful, beautiful gesture. I'm not quite sure why they decided to copy the Eastern Church with, on that front. But at least in the Eastern Church, standing would be more appropriate. The kind of, I guess my understanding of it is, the resurrection, and also there again, it's just a different emphasis. I think in the Latin Church, adoration and kneeling kind of go more hand in hand, right. Whereas in the Eastern Church, it's more of a sign of repentance, maybe.
Right. That's an interesting
question. But there's crossover. There's crossover too, because if you go to a Russian church, at times you'll see people doing prostrations or kneeling at various times that you wouldn't necessarily do that in a Byzantine Catholic church. So there is variation there, I would say.
Yeah, that's interesting about because see, I was not raised with the TLM, the traditional Latin Mass. I was always raised standing and receiving in the hand, and I wonder if the practice of kneeling really stopped because so many, I don't know if it happened organically, because so many churches removed the altar rails. So I mean, logistically, it was difficult to kneel. And then they had the advent of so many Eucharist ministers, where in the old rite, it's just the priest or the deacon that can minister communion. Then it became so much bigger. So yeah. And in
it's weird.
Yeah, if you could tell everybody now, in the Eastern Rite Catholic, it's still that way. That it's just right. Okay.
Well, priest or the deacon. The other thing that is interesting to me, at least from what the Latin Rite Church did with the reform of the liturgy, is like in the Eastern Church, we don't look at it as the priest's back is towards us.
Okay.
We're all facing the same direction, and the priest is like a general in battle. Come follow me. Not like turned around. So the emphasis, I think, for the Eastern churches is that we're all facing the same direction, and in that there's a transcendence, you know, where I'm kind of, I don't know why the Latin Rite, they decided to turn that around. And I think it was Cardinal Ratzinger when he was, I think he had, in one of his books, I think it was The Spirit of the Liturgy, he said something like Mass facing the people,
right,
kind of makes like a closed circle.
yeah,
And I think like,
yeah,
there's one thing they could do like immediately that would, I think, restore some reverence and some awe and, you know, some mystery with the Mass. And that'd be like, you know, turn the altar around.
right,
Not turn the altar around, but, you know, the orientation, you know, rather than have it as like more, you know, like a closed circle, you know.
yeah, yeah,
Have it transcend a little bit, because that's what, you know, the liturgy is. It transcends us, you know. Yes, it's here and now, but it's also, you know. So anyway, I don't know. I think, well, I don't want to get, there's, you know, with the restrictions on the TLM and all of that, that's a whole other topic.
I think I mean, the iconos, there's a very large sense of mystery in the Eastern Rite. And I think that's, you know, the iconostasis, the beautiful icons are like, especially to people in the West, are very sort of mysterious and enigmatic and beautiful. And then you have the priest, I don't know if you say behind the iconostasis. And then, so I think in the TLM, if we were compared to the two, I think just the sense of the ad orientem and the language of Latin, which is, you know, foreign to most Westerners, I think that brings some of that mystery over.
Yep.
But yeah, I think your typical suburban Novus Ordo, where is it? It's nowhere. I don't know. I don't know where it is. I don't know.
Yeah, it's almost like overwhelming to even like talk about that issue right now. You know, I don't go. I will occasionally go to the old Latin Mass, just, you know, occasionally. I cantor at my church, so I'm always kind of like always on. So occasionally I'll go to the TLM just to kind of, you know, not have to perform, you know. But yeah, just that whole mess right now with it's insane.
But, you know what's, you know, oh, sorry to interrupt you, but I just don't want you to lose that point you're trying to make, is that what's interesting, I mean, you as a cantor, is that in Eastern Rite, it's often dominated by male voices. I mean, Russian Orthodoxy, you hear the whoa, you know, that very loud bass.
There's mixed choirs. There's mixed choirs in you know, the Russian church, and I mean, a lot of their Ukrainian Catholic churches, you know, 40, 50 years ago had, you know, huge choirs.
Yeah.
And now we're so small now that, you know, cantor, you know, I lead and people sing, and what's weird is like when I'm not there to cantor, it's just spoken. Yeah. Like we really don't chant it at all. So the good thing, I think, with the Byzantine Catholic Church and the Ukrainian Catholic Church is we have this history of kind of congregational singing.
Yeah.
So you don't really need a choir.
Yeah.
There's, you know, like we use Galician chant, I would say.
What is that, Ken? What is that?
I guess it's a style of the chant. Like there's Nomine, right? Which is very popular in Russia. You have Galician, you have Carpatho-Russian. It's just they're different melodies, you know.
Okay.
So, for example, in Galician chant, you know, we would say Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy, to you, O Lord, amen. And in the more Carpatho-Rusyn way, it would be like, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy, to you, O Lord, amen. So it's just a different style.
Beautiful.
So,
The Eastern Rite is a very, I would say, male-centered liturgy, as opposed to the Novus Ordo, which it's become very female-centered, I think. I mean, except for the priest who shows up to do the consecration, and that's about it. It's fairly dominated by women. I mean, men. I mean, not even at least you used to have like the altar boys, but that's been taken over by females too. So it's just it's a stark contrast when you go from one to the other.
Yep. Yeah. You definitely get that vibe, especially like in the Russian church and the Ukrainian church and the Greek church. Like there's this masculine vibe.
Yep.
But at the same time, it's also very Marian, which is very feminine at the same time. So you don't get this. It's not like a domination thing. It's more of like a blending of. But see, I think part of the problem in the Latin Rite, it's about being busy. It's about everybody having a part.
Yep.
And when you make it that, things become off, I think. Like dominant. And I also think the music in the Eastern Church is, I think it's more attractive to men.
Yes.
Just like Gregorian chant is very attractive to men. Not to knock the Novus Ordo hymns, but they can be, they can kind of lend themselves to maybe a more, feminine attraction, like trying to, like an example, I don't know an example off the top of my head. But yeah, it's the way it is. Now, like with Byzantine hymnography, I don't know, like if you've noticed in the book, you definitely have this, there's definitely a sense of spiritual warfare involved, I think, too.
Oh yeah.
It's very, very clear. It's very, there again, there's this Marian dimension, but even Mary seems to like kick butt, like, so there again, it's a beautiful, I think the Eastern Church does a really good job with, blending the, the masculine and the feminine, that it's not one or the other, it's both.
The Novus Ordo liturgical music is very trite at times, because I mean, I grew up with the St. Louis Jesuits, I mean, that exemplify that. And something like, "Here I am, Lord."
Yeah, I mean, I can get into them occasionally, like privately in my car while driving. Like I can listen to like "Glory and Praise" by Matt Talbot, but I really I don't want to hear it at church.
Yeah.
Like I just don't want to hear it at church. I don't want to hear guitar at church. I don't want to hear anything that reminds me of a bar at church, or a club, or, and that's why there again, I think the Gregorian chant is so appealing to men. Like there's a church, there's a Latin Rite parish in Conshohocken, not too far from my house. And I mean, you'll go there and it's like, there's like young men there.
Yeah.
In fact, sometimes there's more men than women.
exactly.
It's crazy. So
Yeah, I mean, to see the contrast is like probably one of the last, the sort of masses I went to. They had electric guitar and drums. I mean, it was like a full band, And I forget what the song was. It could have been "Here I Am, Lord" or "On Eagle's Wings" or something like that. But a lady got up and started dancing around the sanctuary. And I'm like, oh, I was like, okay, I'm done. And then, are you familiar with this is in your neighborhood, St. Tikhon's up in northeastern Pennsylvania, the
yeah,
OCA?
I was
Yeah.
actually just there a couple weeks ago.
Oh, awesome. So
Yeah,
I
I
did I
went
did
for
a
the day.
little like mini retreat there a few years ago, and it was the place was very quiet when I was there, and I remember sitting in the chapel, and I mean the chapel was just always dead quiet. Nobody always sit in the back. I mean, they don't have like chairs, but they have like benches in the corners,
Benches on the side, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I was sitting there, and a lady, um, I don't know if she was like a tourist or just popping in. I thought she was Orthodox, and she walked up. She was taking pictures, and she kind of walked up like really close to the iconostasis up there.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't do that. And one of the monks, I don't know if they call them, I don't know if they're monks, but
Yeah,
one of
monks.
the, they're monks. Okay. One of the monks just boomed out, move back, so, and I don't know where he was. He must have been in the choir or something. And I thought that was cool because they've maintained that like sacred space. It's not like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, this isn't a free for all in here.
Yeah.
Where functionally in the Novus Ordo, we have these theater in the round. It's just like, where is the sacred space? There isn't any.
Yeah.
So,
Well, when I was growing up, like when I was in high school, just starting to go to a Byzantine Catholic church, I remember the priest saying that like laity don't walk through the royal doors
yeah,
like ever. You go, through the deacon's doors, but like you don't stand in front of the altar and you don't go through the royal doors. And I kind of always like, as a young, 14-year-old, I always wondered like, would I get zapped? Would there be would I get electrocuted if I, went through or, and the answer is no. But there again, it's just this heightened awareness that this is not just your dining room table. There's something special here.
yeah. I remember one of the first times I went to Joy of All Who Sorrow in San Francisco, and I don't know, I guess maybe I was overwhelmed. I didn't have a hat like this, but I had like a skull cap on. It was cold, and yeah, I guess he was one of the ushers. He just, take it off,
Oh yeah,
so
yeah. You don't wear a hat. Yeah, men don't wear hats in church unless you're a
yeah,
monk. Unless you're a monk or a priest. Yeah,
right, exactly. I mean,
yeah.
this was during liturgy too, and he was nice about it, but take it off. So I mean, gosh, it's so different. It's just so different. Um, it's a different state of mind. It's just a different vibe. I mean, you could see it preserved in the TLM, but it's not as strong as in Eastern Orthodoxy. It's so different. I don't know if it's the candlelight and the icons and the music. You really feel transported when you go. And I mean, I know certain churches maybe aren't as aesthetically as beautiful as the one in San Francisco, but
Mm-hmm.
boy, you do just feel very transported. And the world, it sounds stupid, I know, but the world outside seems to fade away a little bit.
It does, and I think that's the point of it. It's this. You're meant to like step into a different reality, and I think
That's it.
a well done Eastern church, whether it's Byzantine Catholic or it's Orthodox, you're going to walk in and you're going to notice something very different. That this is a different kind of you're walking into a different realm in a sense.
Yeah.
That the cherubim hymn. Let us who mystically represent the cherubim and sing the thrice holy hymn to the life creating Trinity now lay aside all earthly cares, that we may welcome the King of all invisibly escorted by angelic hosts.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's yeah, there's so much that could be said about the, right worship and what that does in your life and the impact and everything like that. I mean, it's just absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
Um,
And then,
and
yeah, and I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, I've ever since, like, I don't know, like high school, and like I've always been really desirous to like almost like pained to my heart that there is a split,
Yeah.
Because I feel like the Eastern Church, I feel like they have so much to offer. And
I agree.
There's just, yeah, it just, I think the split having had occurred and the churches both kind of growing up in their own way, in their own like world, I think there's so much that could have been beneficial. Like there can be like a lopsidedness, I think, sometimes when, I don't know, it's
I understand what you're
part of my interest with the Rosary too, I think, is that I've learned, and kind of even just recently, that there is that the Rosary can be a meeting place between East and West. And what I mean by that is not that, the Rosary that is typically done in your Latin Rite church, that's a Western devotion that, has evolved and developed over the years. But, praying on beads goes way back, the Jesus prayer. And I just recently learned this. Anybody that knows anything about the Rosary, you probably have heard the word Marian Psalter,
right?
Which predates Saint Dominic, right? Have you heard of this? Have you heard of?
Oh yes, I have them.
You have, yeah. I just got this not too long ago. I got it from the Dievo Monastery, which was I think it was a monastery that Saint Seraphim established for nuns.
Wow.
And what's interesting about it, and I would really like to dig a little more deeper into this. They did mail me this little booklet, but it's in Russian.
Oh wow. Okay.
I can't read it. So that there's a short history in there. But according to Saint Seraphim, that this practice of praying 150 Hail Marys goes back to the 8th century.
Wow.
And he says that, this was a common practice and it got lost. So he was trying to revive it. And, to me, that sounds a lot like the Marian Psalter.
Yeah.
But when you look at it from the Western perspective, it looks like it goes back to the 12th century.
Yeah.
Well, Saint Seraphim's saying it goes back to the 8th century, that it was given, I think, to a monk in Egypt by Mary herself. So I'd be really curious to see what evidence there is of that. Like where did he get that information from? Where did Saint Seraphim get that information from? Because when I read the book by Father Donald Calloway, and he kind of traces the Marian Psalter to the 12th century, So, and Saint Seraphim is saying the 8th. So, I'd really be curious to see, where do they get that information from that it goes back that far? And if it does go back that far, then there's a good case to make that this is actually an Eastern devotion.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what they're saying in Russia, that this is this is an Orthodox practice that ended up kind of making its way into the West. Now the West would say that probably the exact opposite. But now what's interesting too, and I'm kind of just getting into this now after having written the book. But have you ever heard of Father Seraphim Zvezdinsky?
No. Mm.
Zvez, I'm Zvezdinsky. He was born in 1883 and he died in 1937. He's a hieromartyr. So he's a martyr in the Russian church, but he, to my understanding, he put mysteries to, or events in the life of Mary, to the 15.
Wow.
What are they called?
Decades?
To the, yeah, there's
Decades?
one decade. Yeah. So it's broken up, 15
Okay.
decades. So he, I don't know if this came from him or if this was from Saint Seraphim or what, but 11 of the 15 mysteries are the same as what are in the West.
That's interesting.
So it's the birth of Mary is first, the presentation of Mary, then it's the Annunciation, the Visitation, the birth of Christ, the presentation of Christ in the temple, then it's the flight into Egypt,
Yeah.
then it's the finding in the temple, then it's the wedding at Cana, crucifixion, and then it's the glorious mysteries. All the way, the last one's the coronation.
Huh.
According to the saints, or this hieromartyr Seraphim Zvezdinsky. And
I believe
so
it.
that's interesting. Yeah. And I don't know where he got that. I don't know if he just kind of developed that, because all of those mysteries are, they're specifically events in the life of Mary.
Yes. Yes.
Whereas in the Western version, at least in the traditional 15, like the agony in the garden,
Yeah, those are Christ.
has nothing to do, with Mary. But this is very much like a Marian, kind of a Marian rosary, if you will.
That's your next book, so you already got it.
Well, there again, there's a lot of information online. There's a lot of information on the internet, but I'm trying to find like original, sources.
Yeah.
So this, going to the Dievo Monastery to get some information is probably a good start.
Yeah, I agree.
But, I don't want to just, cite a person's, blog or whatever. And then,
secondary sources. Before I get into your book real quick, I just got a couple of like jurisdictional questions, I guess you'd call them. Have you noticed recently, or maybe in the last few years, have you noticed more Latin Rite Catholics moving over to Eastern Rite?
There's been some.
Okay.
There have been some people that, there have been some.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, some.
Okay.
But there again, it's very different.
Okay.
I would say, it's more than just, it's more than just an ancient liturgy, I would say.
Yeah.
And if you're like a really, really diehard Latin Rite TLM Catholic, and, you might be really attracted to the ancient liturgy, but then you realize the priest is married and you're like, oh, well, that kind of,
really
is a big change. Or wait a minute, you mean we don't kneel for communion, or so?
I think it's good that the priest is married.
I do too, but I'm just saying there are Catholics that would be like scandalized by that.
Of course, yeah.
So, but yes, I would say yes. We at my church we do have a few that have been around more.
Shifted, yeah.
Yeah, because I think people are afraid that they're going to lose the TLM and that they're going to either have to go Society of St. Pius X, or they're going to have to go to, they're going to go Orthodox, or they're going to go Greek, Byzantine Catholic. So I think that might be the rationale.
Yeah. And this is a question that I've wondered too. Is it? I don't know if you know this. but I know in Eastern Rite you have your own bishops,
Mhm.
and this is kind of a specific question. Now, what happens if Pope Francis decides to allow same-sex marriage in the Roman Catholic Church? Would the Eastern Rite churches have to accept that and still remain in union?
Gosh, that is really hypothetical.
Well, I think it's becoming less hypothetical.
I mean,
I think
but
the
see,
West. I think the West is moving in that direction. So,
I mean, from a Catholic perspective, if the Pope just came out and said that, he's allowing for it, that wouldn't, he can't just do what he wants.
well, I know,
Like to my understanding, like he wouldn't be able to just do what he wants. He is bound a bit to, tradition and what the church actually teaches. So
he is tacitly allowing it right now in Germany. I mean, it is officially taking place in Germany.
Yeah,
so,
but he's not like I guess the question would be, can he officially change church teaching by his own authority?
Yeah. Can I reword it, Ken, real quick? So say like this would happen with the USCCB as it happened in Germany, where the German bishops got together and said, okay, or the USCCB gets together and say, okay, can we make some sort of allowance for same-sex couples? And what would the Eastern Rite churches in the United States do? Would they just say, we're not gonna follow this, what the USCCB is doing?
Yeah, I don't think I can't speak for that. I mean, in a lot of ways, what's going on in Germany is, in a sense, they're already in schism. They're already in schism. So, you don't need the Pope to say it. In a sense, they already are. To be in communion with the church is to adhere to what the church teaches, and they're going against what the church teaches. So, in a sense, I mean, I kind of look at it as they're already in schism in a certain sense. I mean, there's Ukrainian Catholic churches, I'm sure, in Germany. What are they doing? That would be a curious thing. Are they going along with all this stuff too? Probably not.
Yeah, that's what worries me about.
Probably not, but I don't know.
That's what worries me about the union churches, is that from my perspective, I just see the Roman Catholicism just getting further and further away from the teachings of Christ. And I was like, I don't know. I mean, I feel better, leaving, and especially with the ROCOR, with the Russian Orthodox Church outside Russia, which is, very conservative. So, and yeah, I guess that would be, because a lot of people ask me, well, why don't you just go to Eastern Rite Catholic? And I'm like, well,
yeah, and that's where it gets a little tricky, because it's like, and everybody kind of looks at it a different way. Like, we are in a rough time. Like the Catholic Church is going through a really rough time, and and that's another reason I like the Rosary so much, is because it's a way of praying. Like you can't always rely on your own parish or even diocese to give you, like, I mean, of course the Eucharist is there, and we get that nourishment from the Eucharist, but if we don't have a solid prayer life at home, we're gonna, I think the danger, we're in like a lot more danger of kind of getting sucked into a lot of what's going on. So that whole idea, not idea, but that need to have a solid prayer life, not just at church but at home,
I agree,
is I think hugely important, because trust in priests and bishops, at least for me, is very low. very, very low. And I've had my own issues with priests over the years when I was, younger and stuff. That it's a miracle I'm still Catholic. It's an absolute miracle I'm still in the church. It's a miracle that it's an absolute miracle. But a lot of this has really propelled me closer and closer to Christ, and him being my anchor, because it can't be a bishop or a priest. It just can't be.
Now I do want to get into your book.
Sure.
I've written about it several times. My father, God rest his soul, had a very, very strong devotion to the Rosary, and I really credit him with bringing about my conversion back to our Lord Jesus Christ. He would say all the mysteries of the Rosary, including the Luminous, twice a day. So that's like just hardcore.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
I know. God bless him. Now, when I read your book, what it reminded me of, although I've never really practiced it, is, and this is probably what Roman Catholics will be familiar with, is like the scriptural Rosary.
Yep.
It kind of reminded me of that, because I don't want to read from the book because I want people to buy it. But you have a reading, because a lot of times people will do like a meditation with each decade, but you have one for each bead or each prayer, which is really cool. So it makes the Rosary, of course it's longer to say, but it makes it more enriching. And you're using non-Western sources for these meditations, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's what I really like.
Yeah, everything that I use is from Byzantine hymnography.
Beautiful.
The hardest one to do was the wedding at Cana, because I couldn't find a lot of Byzantine hymnography about the wedding feast, about the wedding at Cana. So that was a challenge. But yeah, everything is from the Eastern Church. Now, the inspiration in a lot of ways was the scriptural Rosary books that I like. This one.
Yep, that's what I was thinking of. Yep.
This is the first one that everyone probably gets.
Yeah.
And I like it. And there's other ones out there that I like. But I've never been one to just pray the 10 Hail Marys in a row. I've always liked to kind of, I'm very ADD. So I need to be centered in what I'm, each Hail Mary needs a thought, or I get kind of lost. So
yeah,
that was kind of the inspiration.
I think the scriptural Rosary, like the one that you showed, I think for me, it tends to be a little bit repetitive. And I didn't find that with yours. And it does tend to slow you down, because some people, speed read the Rosary, because you say the Rosary in 10 minutes, 15 minutes,
Yeah. And not with this book. Although you can use it however you want too. Like there's days if I'm in a hurry, I'll just look at the icon.
Right.
There's no set way of using it.
The other thing I liked, the icons in here are very classical Byzantine. I love all icons, but yeah, they're very classical Byzantine icons in here. And I think they are really enriching. This I really love. This was because I love Saint Joseph. And so I'm reading things that I'm not familiar with. So this was on the Annunciation. Joseph, your betrothed and guardian, O Theotokos, was amazed and perplexed when he beheld the mystery of your conception without seed. I don't know, it sounds beautiful to me. It's a different kind of, I don't know, it's a good translation. I like it a lot. Yeah. And then it goes on, but he, Joseph, recalled the rain falling on the fleece and the bush burning with fire, but not consumed, and the blossoming rod of Aaron. Thus he testified before the priests and cried out, a virgin bears a child and still remains a virgin. Yeah, some of the wording is so different in Orthodoxy. like the bush is not consumed. That's one of my favorite icons is,
Mhm.
what is it called? Ken, you probably know it. The
The burning bush.
Yes, or
Yeah.
the unburnt bush or something like that. I
Yep.
love, because I live in a high fire danger area, and I've read stories where monks would use, I wouldn't say use that icon, but call on that icon for help in terms of fires.
Mhm.
So
And I think Saint Tikhon's has their own coffee now. I think it's called Burning Bush
I didn't
coffee.
know. That's a good name.
Yeah, I bought some. It's good, but I think it's called. I think their coffee brand is called Burning Bush.
So some of the language in here might be a little foreign
Yeah,
to
that's going
like,
to be part two.
yeah, like tabernacle, and I mean different, with a different type of connotation to it.
Yeah, there's a lot of there's a lot of like, you almost have to, what Byzantine hymnography kind of forces you to do is almost to learn a lot about the Old Testament.
Yeah.
Like this one right here. This is from the coronation of Mary. You have been called the ark of Moses and the rod of Aaron.
Yeah.
For Christ the flower has blossomed forth from you, O tree of life.
Yes.
So like Mary's being called the tree of life, and Christ is the flower on the tree of life. I mean, it's just, you kind of look at that and you're just like, wow, these guys are geniuses, you know, scriptural geniuses.
What are those? What are those? I don't know how else to say it. What are those things that like the deacons hold, and it's got like a sunburst on the top of like a long stick? Do you know what I'm
like
talking about?
I don't know what they're called. They're like a processional fan.
Right. Right.
They have I think they have a seraphim on it.
Okay.
So, for example, during the Eucharistic prayer, the deacons would, and that's symbolic of the seraphim being present.
Okay, so they're not just decorative; they actually have a liturgical purpose. Oh,
yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Just like the icons, because a lot of people see. I'm very ignorant to this, and I did go to. This was an OCA, Orthodox Church of America, and one of the priests took time to explain to me the icons are just not decorative; they're just not beautiful works of art. Yeah, but he was saying no. You usually have this one here, and it has this meaning and that meaning. And I was like, oh, okay, because I mean, in some more traditional Catholic churches, you'll have, statues and things, but they don't really have a liturgical purpose like in the Eastern Rite. They don't. I mean, you don't have to have something here or there, or you could have any saint, or you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think it depends on the church at times. Like definitely with the iconostas, there's definitely a pattern in like most all Eastern churches. There's a pattern that would be recognizable in pretty much all Byzantine churches. There's some give and take there, but yeah, it's most obvious on the icon screen where there's like a place for this and a place for that icon.
Yeah.
And then, like there's variation though with like, for example, behind the altar. I know like in a lot of the Russian Orthodox churches, it seems like behind the altar, like directly behind the altar would be an icon of the resurrection.
Right.
But in some other churches, you might have what's it called? The desis icon, where you have like Jesus on a throne in the middle and Mary and John the Baptist on either side. I've seen in some Greek churches where it's like, yeah, so there is there's some leeway in the different traditions, but there's also a lot of standardization, I guess you could say.
Okay. Now, I was curious too. In Eastern Rite Catholics, does the tradition of the Rosary, is it is it, has it, is it there? Is there the tradition of saying the rosary, even though it doesn't, like you said, it's not, it doesn't have the history like the West does.
Yeah, so it seems like it, and I'm still learning a little bit about this. Like my book was really meant to be a devotional. It wasn't meant to
Right.
be like a history, because
Right.
that it gets really complicated then. And I was just trying to make like a small, pocket size devotional. But it seems like where it is popular in the East, it was brought to the East from the West.
Wow. Okay.
Like
Okay.
like in Ukraine, there's a website on a Ukrainian Catholic, like a prominent Ukrainian Catholic YouTube site, where every day a different parish in Ukraine leads the Rosary live via like Zoom. And there's like 500 videos uploaded.
Okay.
And there's just different churches, like every day there's a different church. But the version of the Hail Mary is different. Like we have a different version of the Hail Mary.
Okay.
So for example, the Ukrainian Catholic version would be, "Rejoice, Virgin Mother of God, Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with you. Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb. For you have borne Christ, the Savior and Redeemer of our souls."
Wow, that's beautiful.
The
That's
Russians,
beautiful.
I think it's a little more brief. I think it's, the ending is, "For you have borne Christ," or no, "For you have borne the Savior. For you have borne the Savior of our souls."
Oh, that's beautiful too.
So it's there is some variation there, but we have a different Hail Mary that we would typically say.
Right. Right. One thing I wanted to talk about too is the Jesus prayer. I mean, you mentioned it. I actually make these. I now I make these. These are probably not. These are not.
This is one of yours.
Oh wow! So
that's one of yours.
Wow.
Yeah,
so this
green one.
This is like an Eastern Rite priest. I had a long conversation with him about the Jesus prayer, and he was talking about making something like a rosary, but with 33 beads, one for each year that Jesus was alive. So I made these. So I've got, 3 here, 30 here. And I don't know, I think that was kind of an interesting way for me to, I don't know if it's combining. I mean, because I use a rosary centerpiece here, but I just thought it was kind of an interesting way to bridge sort of the East and West. But I say the Jesus prayer on each bead, instead of like a Hail Mary or.
And I think the beauty of it all, like you will definitely, I've encountered people in the Byzantine Catholic Church who they don't want to see anything Catholic in the Eastern Church at all. It's almost like you're like a heretic that deserves to be burned at the stake if you introduce or do like a Western devotion. And but I think that can be a very myopic way of looking at the church. Like I use the Listovka, right? Sometimes I use the Chodki, and I use the Rosary. Like, better to have three guns, right? 3 rifles than just one.
That's it. That's all. That's an awesome analogy. Yeah, I was going to say that some Orthodox would see this as like a type of contamination of orthodoxy. I mean, I don't look at it that way because, like I said in the beginning, as somebody that's going from Roman Catholicism to Orthodoxy, I don't want to lose the Rosary, and this was a way for me to bring those two worlds together, and I didn't know how to do it. So
well. I actually called a couple Orthodox priests that I knew to ask them if my idea would be disrespectful in any way to Byzantine hymnography, and the answer was no. The answer was no. I've actually had more opposition from people in the Byzantine Catholic Church than I have from the Orthodox.
Why is that?
Because there again, there have been Latinizations of the Byzantine Church, specifically before Vatican II. Actually, Vatican II was really good for the Byzantine Catholic Church, because a lot of our, we were told to go back to our traditions and to kind of like get rid of Latinizations.
Oh, I see.
So there's that idea that you can't have anything, but that's a very myopic way of looking at things. Like there's a lot of crossover and carryover. And, if your great grandmother in Ukraine was praying the Rosary, 200, 300 years ago, you can't just say, well, you got to throw that away now,
Yeah.
But see, I would say, like, if my idea of combining Byzantine hymnography with the Rosary is in any way a non-Orthodox thing to do, then I would say that what Hiram Martyr Seraphim Zvezdinsky did would also be kind of wrong. I almost look at the Rosary and these prayers, like occasionally they'll be criticized, like, oh, you're just praying Hail Marys over and again. Like it's so hokey, like, well, wait a minute though. David and Goliath, look at the slingshot, he took down Goliath, with a weapon that was like a joke, very basic, and I think the beauty of the Rosary, the beauty of these prayers is that they're really, really basic and anybody can do them. And there's even room for, like there's room for adaptation.
Yep.
Even the prayer rule of the Mother of God in the Russian Church, there's so many different ways of praying it.
Yeah.
Where you can almost like personalize it seems like.
Yeah. Padre Pio said the Rosary was his weapon. Yeah.
Yeah, I like to think of the Rosary that way. If we're, you got those who have a gun collection that they like to show off their guns, their rifles and their arsenal. Well, you can also do that with the Rosary. It's a spiritual weapon.
Amen.
I jokingly say every Hail Mary prayed on the Rosary is like a spiritual bullet in the ass of the devil.
Wow, that's beautiful. It's beautiful. I was thinking about this too, and we got on the topic of masculinity earlier. I was raised with the Rosary. My dad didn't pray. I don't remember him praying the Rosary when we were young specifically, but I remember him having a very Marian devotion, being Italian. And you see that in Hispanic men too, especially here in California. But I remember, it's an odd memory to have because I don't have a lot of memories in my childhood, but I remember a very young priest in the 1970s talking, he would intermittently teach us our religion classes. And he would say, don't be like the old lady that sits in the church and prays the Rosary all day.
I just read that in your book. Yeah.
Yeah. Be like the person who questions everything. Question everything. Yeah. And the Rosary was associated with superstition. Like you said, very hokey, old-fashioned, and it was really dumped on for a long time. I hate to say it, Catholics will get annoyed, but I don't care. I think somebody that sort of revived interest in the Rosary in the 80s with me was Madonna, the singer. Because she wore it, she was wearing it, and it's like, what is it? I never had a Rosary. And then my dad became devoted. He had like a sort of a later, we all have many conversions in our life, but he became very devoted to the Rosary and started saying it. And I had a different perception of the Rosary, kind of like the metaphors that you're using with
same with me.
Because I was really, at that time, I was really in a dark place. So the Rosary, I can't articulate things very well, not as well as you, but I guess people would think as the Rosary as being a very passive thing, and maybe something women would do when they get together or sit alone. But I mean, the Rosary can be a very active way to intercede for someone, or at least ask Theotokos or Our Lady to intercede for someone. You're doing something that has like a real impact in the world today, not just something that's like ethereal, you know what I mean? And it's definitely something that men can do too.
Yep. Yeah, I have a story like what you shared with your dad. Like my grandfather used to go to this retreat every year, Malvern Retreat House. Have you ever heard of it?
I have heard of it, yeah.
Yeah, so they have like these annual men's retreats, and he used to go for 30 years before he died. He was going to these every year. And when I got old enough to go with him, he took me. And I remember one of the retreats that we went on, it was an archdiocesan priest who the entire weekend, the theme of the retreat, and there again, you never know what you're going to get at this retreat. You could have a really dynamic, wonderful priest who's just like, yes. And you could also have like, oh my gosh, like how did they let this guy in, you know? Well, this one was a really good one. And the whole retreat was about the Rosary. And at the end, this priest, in a very manly way, challenged all the men present at this retreat, and it was like, over 100, I think, to commit to praying the Rosary every day for the rest of your life. And my grandfather did. He did it. That retreat was maybe like 5-6 years before he died. He prayed the Rosary multiple times a day. And he was a tough guy. He was not a mamby-pamby, he was tough. And, he prayed the Rosary, And so, yeah, and I think if you read the lives of, the saints and stuff like that, there's definitely this manly dimension to praying the Rosary, that it's a weapon, that it's a weapon, a spiritual weapon.
Yeah, and that's been lost. Yeah, my dad was that way too. He was like a bulldog, very, 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 very unlike me. And it's very, I mean, that's what's many, many things of it has attracted me to the East. But religion in the West, Christianity, has become so feminized. And
in some places it has, yeah.
I mean, except in the world of the TLM, which is a small world.
You do occasionally, like in this archdiocese, in the archdiocese where I live. I mean, there are some Novus Ordo parishes. There are some parishes that I would say do a really good job, of doing the new mass, where it's celebrated in a way that's informed by the old. But I think that's not the norm.
No.
If it was the norm, I think that'd be a great thing. I think it would be a whole different ball game. I would think, but
that's a difficult needle, I think, for a lot of priests, because I remember for a time I was living down in Los Angeles and there was a priest trying to do that. It's a difficult needle for them to thread, because then if you go too far over, and this is from experience, I'm not just saying this because I'm a chauvinist, but women will get upset and say, you don't have altar girls. Where's all the women lectors? And where's the women Eucharist ministers? And, you're starting to separate things, because in the West, they just let that out of the bag so much. Yeah. Where in the East, it's not really a problem because they never went so far to the extreme. They just never did it.
Yeah. There's a story when I started going to Catholic school in the 7th grade. I was an altar boy at the Latin Rite Church for a couple of years there, and at that time it was still just altar boys. The girls weren't in yet, but there was this old like vintage poster on the wall, and it had a knight with the armor and the sword, and it had an altar boy kneeling next to it. They're both kneeling, and the altar boy is dressed like an altar boy with his hands like this, and the knight is an adult with this sword and everything like that. And on the bottom it said Knights of the Altar. And as soon as it was a couple of years later, but as soon as the girls were allowed to start serving, one of the girls, won't mention her name, she crossed out knights and wrote queens.
Oh.
And this was like a kid. This wasn't like, an adult woman. This was a kid. And I remember a lot of the boys at the time, we did not want to serve anymore. Like and it wasn't, it wasn't chauvinism. It was just, there's some things. I teach at a Catholic school, and at the school where I teach, for theology, it's single gender. So I just teach boys. It's a co-ed school, but I just teach the boys. And the kids seem to love it. They like to have a break. They like that there's a couple of classes where they can go and they don't have to, try to show off or perform, or they can just be guys. And the girls, they can just be girls,
Well, sex is also not a construct, and there's particular issues that'll interest boys as opposed to girls, and girls as opposed to boys. So
yep.
Because I think the difficult thing, but you're certainly gonna help. And every little step at least is a step in the right direction. And this is what I think attracted me and a lot of men to the Latin TLM, is that there are men there. I write about that in my book. I was shocked because, especially in the Novus Order here in San Francisco in the Bay Area, you just see a lot of women, usually older women, and the kids have been dragged along, and the men are not. They're not there. They're just not there. They're just not there.
Yeah,
and you see it. And when I go to Orthodox liturgy too, there's a lot of guys there, and there's a lot of guys there with their families, but there's guys there by themselves too. But there's a lot of men there.
I just went to, I was in Washington I think it was last weekend or the weekend before, and I went to the shrine of John Paul II, and then I also went to the shrine of the Immaculate Conception, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to go. I've never been there before. I'm going to go. I went to the Roquefort Cathedral in Washington, and I walked in, and they did a good job. The choir was beautiful. The church was beautiful. Very small church, or very small cathedral as far as standing room, but there were quite a few younger men there and women. There was a nice variety, but it was like it was a Saturday night, and they had the all night vigil. They had Vespers and Matins, so it's like a 3-hour long service, and I was just really impressed to see the youth and the young men there, and there again, it was like Roquefort does a really good job with music and choir, and I think it was an all male choir too, so it's just like, but I think women are attracted to that as well.
Yes.
It's not just attractive to the men, it's attractive to the women as well.
Yeah, I think because there's strong men there. So one of the things that I liked about Orthodoxy is that the priests are married, and 9 times out of 10 they have families. So I don't know, it's a different aesthetic. It's just I know a lot of people are very committed to priestly celibacy in the West, but I think being married and with the family, it gives them a really different point of view. And I think it attracts a different it attracts a different seminarian too.
Yeah, well, I think the idea too is like, and I think this is in some places has been lost, even I think maybe across the board, but like marriage is not for the weak either. Like, it's not like, okay, you get married and it's just like a free for all for sex, you know, like there's discipline involved. There's marital chastity, you know, and you know, it's whether you're a celibate priest, you're a monk, you're a married priest, you're a married man. If you want to live the truth of your sexuality, it's hard. It will demand of you a lot. So it's not like, you know, sometimes you'll hear people in the Catholic Church say, well, they should just let these priests get married. And I think that's true, they should, but that would not have solved, that wouldn't have changed the priests that did horrible things would not have been good husbands either, you know.
Oh, no.
Like,
no.
Now maybe with a married priesthood, it wouldn't have been such a easy place to hide, you know, but it wouldn't have been the answer to a lot of these men that were doing bad things.
I agree.
You know,
And in Orthodoxy, I have to say, I haven't really met priests that are notably effeminate, but I mean, they're all pretty masculine guys. But in the West, I rarely meet a priest, I hate to say it, that is masculine. They're ephebic, I hate to say. Yeah. And I think that it just kind of trickles down to everything. I think in the liturgy, in the prayer life, and there's not the sense of battle. There's not a sense of a warrior. That you have more of a sense of a Broadway entertainer, and they're there to entertain people, to be liked, and to raise money, and to hobnob with people. It's just completely different, and it's
it can be, yeah, can be that way, yeah. It can look that way a lot of times. It can definitely.
Yeah. So I mean,
but that's the dimension, I think, too, that the East has kind of kept and has been lost a little bit in the West, is just that whole idea of spiritual warfare, and that we're in the church militant. This is the place of battle, you know. This is not the place of vacation, you know.
And then I think that's why the connotation of prayer and, you know, and being devout and being outwardly devout is often connotated with being feminine or weak in the West, but you don't have that. You don't have that in the East. It's really a lot of times it is the opposite. And I think you don't always want to judge a book by its cover, but I mean, a priest friend of mine, God rest his soul, he said the outward often mirrors the inward. And I just think if what you see on the outside is soft and squishy and weak, that's what's going on in the interior. And I
can be, yeah.
And I do see Orthodox priests that just look like they do heavy lifting, you know, and they just they're not necessarily physical, but they do have a presence about them that commands respect and can be imposing, but also it's also very welcoming at the same time. It's strong. It's difficult for people to walk that line, and I think a lot of them have been able to do it. And I think just because as dads, as fathers, they had to do that, is you don't want to be so strong that your kids hate you, but you also, you know, want to be very, very present and alert, and you want to be and you want to be involved enough and strict enough that they're raised right, that they're not like wild animals growing up. And I think you see that in Orthodoxy, where with the good priest can do both of those things. So
I agree.
yeah.
It's a challenge, especially like in our culture. It's such a challenge to have that balance too, I think. And the balance of like what you just said, like it can look intimidating on one end, but it's also, there's a welcoming there as well. It's there again, I think the East and the West, I think, at least through prayer, I think there's, I always hope to see more of an impact, a spiritual impact where, going back to the church, fathers and the spiritual tradition, the monastic influence in the East, I think it really does. I think it has a lot to offer the Church of the West. And, this book was an effort to kind of give those who pray the Rosary, and maybe those who don't pray the Rosary, a small taste of that. Because, many Christians, many Orthodox Christians are not exposed to Byzantine hymnography that much. I mean, unless you're going to a monastery, you're not going to get it that much unless you're praying it at home or whatever. So I just see so much potential with, at least in a prayerful kind of way, to kind of enrich our lives, enrich our own lives, using the best arsenals of both, in a sense.
You got it. And John Paul, for all his faults, he did say that the church breathes with two lungs, the East and the West. I mean, you can breathe with one lung and live, a lot. I mean, I think Francis only has one lung, but
he does. I think he does.
I mean, yeah. But the problem with that, if that one lung you have becomes diseased, you're in real trouble. And I think that's happening with the West. And so I think you are, I can't recommend this book enough. I think you're on the right track. The West needs the East. I don't think the East needs the West. But there's a good book I want to recommend. It's called Holy Rus. And it's about how the church is thriving in Russia, post-Soviet Union. I mean, just the churches that they've built there are magnificent. And the the monasteries that have reopened and are full of seminarians, you do not see that in the West. So I except maybe in some TLM quarters. So I think there's a lot that the West needs to learn. And I think time's running out, and they better do it. And I think your book is really, really excellent. And I am going to put in the video description of this video how and where to buy Ken's book.
Real quick, I want to read this. This is from John Paul's Orientale Lumen. I think
take your time, please.
Just real quick, because I don't want to hold you up. It says, he said, in the study of revealed truth, East and West have used different methods and approaches in understanding and confessing divine things, and that we should not be surprised if sometimes one tradition has come nearer to a full appreciation of some aspects of a mystery of revelation than the other, or has expressed them better.
Wow.
I think he was giving one to the Eastern Church and saying, like, you guys have a lot right, and you have a lot you could offer.
Yeah. Well,
I think how I interpret that was that he was admitting that, the Eastern Church, they have in some ways come nearer to a full appreciation of some aspects of mysteries of revelation. Then,
Yeah. Well, on
And
my
they can balance each other out. I think they can really,
totally.
like here's a stereotype, and this is totally a stereotype, but like you'll hear in the West, the emphasis was on the the crucifixion, death,
Right.
this, the passion of Christ, the suffering of Jesus, and in the East, the emphasis is more resurrectional,
Yeah.
you know. And I think that's a stereotype, but I think there's a little truth to that, and that's where I believe he's saying that you know there has to be a better job. If the church had never split, if the East and the West had never split, there would have been more of an there would have been more rubbing off of the best of each church. I think there would have been it'd be a healthier body.
Yeah.
It's easier to breathe with two lungs, like you said. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Russia is definitely on my bucket list, and Ukraine, and I'll get probably a Romania. I mean,
Romania is beautiful. I spent some time in Romania. Beautiful
oh,
country.
lucky you. Wow. Yeah,
Beautiful churches.
yes, yeah, I've seen them. But I also want to go to Poland, because Poland is in context of John Paul, it's an interesting place, because it's kind of, especially in terms of religion, it's kind of where East and West kind of met.
Yep.
Because
Yep.
of course there's a lot of iconography in Poland, Our Lady Czestochowa.
Yep.
And it's an interesting place. So it's I'm not surprised that John Paul had that perception.
And I would say, I don't know if this is true. I don't want to say this if it's wrong, but I would say probably in the West, as far as in Western Catholicism, I would say Poland would be the closest thing to maybe what Russia has, as far as being like the church is so much a part of like everything, and that could be bad and good at some time. I mean, there's arguments for the blending of church and state being dangerous and stuff like that, but I think Poland is, and I think really they're being attacked right now too.
Yeah.
To try to become more, European.
Well,
more liberal.
I think Poland is in danger of becoming Ireland.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I agree.
Which I grew up with Ireland being kind of the seat of Catholicism as a kid. In the 70s, they shipped all their priests, to America, and where are they now? They're completely gone.
Yep.
So yeah, Poland is in danger, and I pray for Russia. I pray, that's not a popular thing to say, but I pray for the Ukraine. I just hope the United States.
Yeah.
I hope the United States stays out of it. So
yeah, I mean, what did St. Paul say? Our battle is not against flesh and blood, but with the principalities and like my enemy. As a Ukrainian Catholic, my enemy are not Russian Orthodox Christians.
Right.
My enemy is the evil one, not a person, another person.
I think this
and vice versa.
Yeah, I don't want to get deep into this, but if I had to say one thing that kind of turned me off of Orthodoxy, is it 20 years ago, and why I went to Roman Catholicism, was that Orthodoxy became a bit too ethnic, and nationalistic, and I always kind of felt like Roman Catholicism was this, big tent church. You had like different cultures, different languages, but unfortunately that's not the truth, because I mean, here in California, it's become very segregated, where you have Hispanics going to Spanish Mass, you have Anglos going to English. So it's, or Vietnamese, it's not. I mean, where you do see a blending is, strangely enough, or not strangely enough, is at the TLM, where they're not speaking any living language, they're speaking a dead language. But also Orthodoxy, where they're using Slavonic. You see all different kinds of people and backgrounds like I'm not Russian, and I go to Russian Orthodox, and there's a lot of non-Russians there. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, they do I think they do a decent job of even using different languages too,
yeah,
like not just Slavonic, they'll throw in some English there as well.
they do.
But yeah, it's a hard balance. I mean, it's a hard balance that, we are, like no matter how hard we try, we kind of end up in our like ethnic, ghettos, and it's they tried in the United States, back at what was it, the 1800s, they tried to kind of have like a church that was more American, and it didn't work.
Right, right.
Really didn't work, because now it's with all with all the immigration, there's a lot of ethnic churches now.
Yeah.
Or there's like 4 different ethnicities in one church.
Yeah. I think in the West,
The way it
Latin
is.
clean a lot of that up. I think if they just went back to Latin, you don't have that segregation because of language. And then and then again, I think in the East you never really had that problem. Although, like when I was at St. Ticomb's up in northeastern Pennsylvania, their liturgy was in English.
Yeah, the OCA, the Orthodox Church of America, is the English is used pretty predominantly, I would say.
But it's weird because of the way I'm taking too long. Because of the way it's presented, it almost feels like a different language. It's very bizarre. Because like when I was there, I was like, wow, this is English. But it sounds so different. It just,
They use a lot of different melodies from different ethnicities.
yeah.
I think they don't just use like, Russian style music. They have a good blend, I would say.
Yeah, it doesn't feel familiar. It feels different. It
Yeah.
feels that's really remarkable that they're able to do that using the vernacular. I mean, it feels mysterious. It feels holy.
Mhm.
It's just so cool.
I think you get that though when you do English, I've been to Novus Ordo parishes where they use like Gregorian chant,
Yes.
but in
Yeah, me
English,
too. Yeah,
and that can be very beautiful.
I agree.
That can be very, 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 very beautiful.
I agree. Kind of my gateway drug to the TLM was, this is many years ago, 22, 23 years ago, was I went to a Novus Ordo mass in Latin, and they had and they had a cantor that I forget what he was chanting, but but in English, but in a very like what is it called? What is it called?
Like monotone?
Yeah, kind of like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was just him, so it wasn't like a polyphony or whatever they call it. So
Cool.
yeah, it was really beautiful. But I don't know what here to end it. What, because I could talk to you all day. But I mean, I have my feelings about where the West is going and where the East is going. I kind of feel like the West, I don't know. It seems like the West is so big. It's kind of like the Titanic. It just, I think everybody can see the iceberg straight ahead, but the ship is just so big and so cumbersome that I just think they can't turn. And
well, Benedict, I think it was Pope Benedict, or maybe when he was Cardinal Ratzinger, he said something to the effect of the church being smaller.
yes.
And I think that's happening. like we're getting to the point where a Catholic could actually have more in common with a Baptist than the priest down the street.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's especially with what's going on in the world, right now, it's lines are being drawn and people are really having to really figure out what they believe.
Yeah.
And I think the church is becoming smaller in this, like in a way where maybe going through tough times will bring churches closer together.
Yeah, I know
Hard to say.
I know San Francisco is kind of a freak show, but it's my home, and I love it. But there's a Catholic parish that's not far from the Rocourt Cathedral, they have a lot more in common than that Catholic parish has with another Catholic parish across town.
Yeah.
I mean, and I don't mean just liturgically, I'm talking
Yeah.
theologically.
Yep.
I'm talking like major issues.
Yeah.
So
I know. I see it. I see it too around here.
So I don't know. It's very, very weird. I mean, I hope your book, like I said, we all have to do our part, but pray the rosary, east and west. I would say if one thing, saved my ass from literally from, death, hell, whatever you want to call it, AIDS, HIV, it would be my dad's praying the rosary. And even if your kid, I always say nobody is a lost cause. So even if your kids, you're not in touch with them, or they're mad at you, or they're pissed at you, or you're upset with them, or you guys got history, even if you're not seeing them, just sit every night, morning, whatever, pray the rosary for that child. And I think there's a good chance that they'll come back in your life. I did. So
yeah, my mom did that with us. Like my mom prays the rosary every day. Yeah.
God bless her.
When my brother was in Iraq, she started going to mass every day, and then kind of like up in her game. And, yeah, I think there's a lot to be said. I think even my dad prays the rosary too.
Really? So they were both on the front lines, your mom and your brother, they were both on the front
Well, I think, my brother, I think, came back because of the prayers.
Exactly.
My brother's married with 8 kids. And kind of the joke is, he thanked me one time. He said, he learned in a sense what not to do because of me.
So are you older?
I'm older, yeah. But it's almost like, God can use our mistakes for others' benefit. You know what I'm saying? I do. So like the joke is like, I learned what not to do by watching you because I made all the mistakes. I'm 6 years older than him,
Oh, wow.
So,
Saint Monica really prayed Saint Augustine, I think, through a lot of that so all those detours that he took. And I mean, mothers play an important role, but I think fathers do too. So yeah, it's important. So yeah, men, dads, please pray the rosary, especially for your son and your kids. And I think Ken's book is a really, really, really good place to start. So all the info about buying it is right there. And it's not a huge book, and it's not an expensive book. So, don't buy one, buy several. So then if you have a rosary, if you say a rosary with other people, you can just give it to them or loan it to them while you pray, or you can, give it to them as a gift. So, I would pray several. So I give it away too. So, hey, Ken.
Thank you.
God bless you. Thank you so much.
This has been nice. I appreciate you having me on, and this has been nice. Very good.
Well, I never find books that often that really touched me personally, and this one really did. So thank you so much.
Praise God.
Hey, God
bless you.
God bless you.